The ground trembled beneath Ethan's boots, a faint rumble of an engine, far too alien to be anything human. He squinted against the harsh wind, his eyes drawn to the massive alien ship hovering above them, its dark silhouette cutting through the sky like a jagged scar. Beside him, Lena adjusted the straps on her pack, her eyes locked on the ship. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet resolve. "It's time, then," she murmured, though the words barely reached Ethan over the howl of the wind. Ethan gave a brief nod, his hand tightening around the hilt of his rifle. They had been waiting for this moment for weeks, ever since the alien captors had snatched them from Earth, sentencing humanity to this barren wasteland. Now the day had come to face whatever judgment awaited them. As the ship descended, its colossal shadow enveloped the small group of humans standing at the center of the alien transport zone. Ethan could feel his heart hammering in his chest, but he forced himself to steady his breath. He had been a soldier for too long to be rattled by alien ships or their intimidating technology. But there was something about this moment, this judgment, that felt different. As if his very soul was on trial. The landing gear of the ship hit the ground with a deafening crash, kicking up dust and debris. From the opening hatch, figures emerged, tall, spindly beings with skin the color of polished obsidian and eyes that gleamed with a cold intelligence. They were the executives, the alien race responsible for the sentence passed upon humanity. At their leader's side stood a towering figure, easily twice the size of any of the others. The Supreme Executor, their unblinking leader, regarded them with a gaze that seemed to pierce through to the very core of their beings. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as the alien's voice boomed across the dusty plain. "Humans, your fate has been sealed," it said in a voice like shifting gravel. "You have been sentenced to a world where survival is your only purpose. A death world. May you prove your worth or perish." The other aliens stepped aside, and a massive holographic display flickered into existence in front of them. Ethan's stomach lurched as the image of a desolate planet filled the screen. Jagged mountains, sweeping deserts, and oceans of toxic sludge stretched across the horizon. "We will leave you here," the Supreme Executor continued, "on this forsaken planet, where you will face creatures and environments beyond your understanding. You will die or adapt. This is your punishment." Ethan's gaze flickered to the others. Lena, the techie, was already scanning the alien technology with a sharp eye. Marcus, the youngest of them, stood a little to the side, his fists clenched, anger boiling beneath his skin. He had always been the most defiant, and Ethan knew it would take all of his leadership skills to keep the group from splintering. "We don't have to take this," Marcus muttered, his voice low but full of venom. "We fight back." Lena shot him a glance, her face a mask of focus. "We don't know anything about this world yet. Fighting is a last resort." Her tone was practical, but the steel behind her words was clear. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm as he addressed the aliens, trying to hide the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "You can sentence us to die, but you will regret it. We'll survive. We'll find a way to fight back." The Supreme Executor's cold eyes flickered over him, but the alien's face betrayed no emotion. "We do not regret. We merely test. Live or die. The choice is yours." A flick of the alien's wrist, and the ground beneath them began to tremble once more. From the sky, a pair of hovering transport pods descended. The doors of the pods slid open with a sharp hiss, and the prisoners were herded inside. Ethan barely resisted as the aliens shackled his wrists, the metallic cuffs biting into his skin. As the pods lifted off the ground, Lena caught his eye. "Stay sharp," she whispered. Marcus, still seething, muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." The pod rocked with the sudden acceleration as they left the surface of the alien ship behind, the city-sized craft shrinking into a distant speck of cold, alien metal. The stars outside the viewport were nothing like the ones they knew back on Earth. These were foreign, impossibly distant, and foreign to the bone. "We're heading to the death world," Ethan said, his voice low, though it felt strangely hollow in his own ears. He didn't know if it was the gravity of the situation or the weight of the words that made them seem so final. Lena gave him a brief nod, and Marcus didn't respond, his gaze fixed out the viewport, his jaw clenched tight. He looked like he was already planning his escape, or his rebellion. The ship's descent was steady but slow, giving the group ample time to think about what was coming next. Outside, the starry sky slowly faded into the pale blue and orange of an alien atmosphere. The Deathworld loomed beneath them, a world of death and danger. Ethan forced himself to focus. This wasn't about fighting now. This was about survival. He needed to keep the others alive long enough to get them to safety. And that meant working together, something they hadn't fully embraced yet. The pod jolted suddenly, and they were on the surface. A door opened beneath them, and the harsh sunlight burned through the openings as the aliens motioned for them to step out. Lena was first to move, her feet firm on the alien dirt. "Stay close," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a command. Ethan stepped out next, his boots sinking into the soft, reddish soil. Marcus followed, still radiating a quiet fury, but the tension between them had shifted. It was clear, the true test had begun. The group stood in silence, the massive alien ship departing, leaving them alone on this hostile world. Ethan glanced at the horizon. The Deathworld wasn't just a place, it was their trial. And only one thing was certain: humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. As the alien sky stretched above them, an unfamiliar sound reached their ears, a guttural growl that sent a shiver through Ethan's spine. Something on this world was already hunting them. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and burnt earth, the sky above them streaked with clouds that pulsed in unnatural shades of violet. Ethan took a deep breath, the weight of the alien atmosphere pressing against his chest. His heart was still hammering from their landing, but there was no time for fear now. They had been abandoned on this forsaken world, and survival meant keeping a clear head. Lena knelt down, her hands sweeping across the ground, collecting a handful of the strange, dark soil. "Toxic," she murmured under her breath, her lips pursed as she analyzed the composition with her portable scanner. "Barely breathable. This isn't just any planet. Whatever they call this death world, it's no exaggeration." Ethan glanced over at Marcus, who stood a few paces away, his back stiff with anger. The younger man's hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the alien transport pod, the defiance still burning in his eyes. Ethan met his gaze. "Marcus," he called, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need to focus, all right? We're not dead yet. But that won't last long if we keep acting like we're still in charge." Marcus shot him a look, eyes flashing with fury. "You heard them, Ethan. They're testing us. Throwing us into a death trap and watching to see if we can survive. This is bullshit. We should be fighting back, not playing their damn game." Lena stood up, shaking her head. "Fighting back is the last thing we need to do right now. We don't know what we're up against." Her voice was calm, practical. "We need to figure out where we are, how to stay alive, and what's hunting us." She gave Ethan a brief, pointed glance. "And we need to stick together. We don't have the luxury of ego right now." Marcus growled low in his throat but didn't argue further. His body was wound tight, and Ethan could tell he was itching for a fight, but now wasn't the time. They needed to find shelter, food, water, anything to survive this alien nightmare. Ethan motioned for them to move out. "We scout. Lena, you're on tech. See if you can tap into anything useful around here. Marcus, keep an eye on our surroundings. Stay alert." The team set off into the barren landscape. The ground beneath their boots was uneven, crusted with blackened rocks that seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural light. Jagged mountain ranges loomed in the distance, and the wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of distant, eerie growls. Something was out there, something large, hungry. "Do you hear that?" Marcus's voice was tense, a sharp whisper cutting through the air. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his rifle, though he hadn't heard anything. "What?" The growls were louder now, a series of deep, guttural rumbles vibrating through the ground. Lena's scanner beeped urgently, flashing warnings in multiple languages. "It's coming toward us," she said, her voice laced with quiet urgency. And it's fast. Ethan scanned the horizon, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. Through the haze of dust, something large and shadowy shifted in the distance. The shape was too massive to be human, too sleek to be a simple animal. Whatever it was, it moved with an unnatural speed, closing the distance between them rapidly. Ethan didn't waste time. "Move!" he ordered, his voice sharp. "Find cover, now!" The three of them sprinted toward a cluster of jagged rocks half buried in the sand. As they ducked behind the stones, Ethan's mind raced. They'd been on this planet for less than an hour, and already something was hunting them. But what kind of predator moved so quickly? And why hadn't they seen it before? Marcus was panting beside him, his eyes darting around, never settling. "We need to fight it," he muttered under his breath. "We can't just run." "Hold your fire," Ethan snapped. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. The growls grew louder. The sound reverberated through the rocks like a living thing, as if the very air was alive with menace. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. He couldn't let his guard down. Not for a second. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it, a blur of motion. The creature was a shadow in the distance, just a flicker against the alien landscape. It was massive, with a long, sinuous body that twisted unnaturally, its form indistinguishable from the terrain itself. Its eyes were large, gleaming with predatory focus as it scanned the area. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just hunting them, it was studying them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Stay low," Ethan hissed. "Whatever it is, it knows we're here." Lena was crouched behind him, her scanner still whirring softly as it pinged. "It's bigger than anything we've seen on Earth. And it's not alone. There are more of them nearby. This isn't just one predator. It's a pack." Marcus's lips curled in a snarl. "Great. So we're prey. Just like the aliens said?" "We'll survive," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "We'll make it out of here." The distant growls erupted into a chorus of savage, echoing howls. The pack was closing in, and with it, the reality of their situation hit Ethan like a wave. This wasn't just some random trial. They were being hunted, not by just any creature, but by something designed to make sure they never saw the light of another day. "We need a plan," Lena said, voice tight with anxiety. "We need to fight back, or we'll be dead before nightfall." Ethan glanced around, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. Their backs were to the rocks, and the creature was almost on them. There was no more time to hesitate. "Marcus," he said, his voice low but commanding, "you lead. Get us to that mountain range. We'll have more cover there." The growls were closer now, each one more distinct, the sound vibrating the ground beneath their feet. It was a hunt, and they were the prey. Ethan turned to Lena. "You're with me. Stay close, and keep that scanner active. We need any advantage we can get." Lena gave him a quick nod, her face set in grim determination. There was no turning back now. With a final glance at the oncoming pack, Ethan gave the signal. "Move out!" And they ran deeper into the hostile world, with the growls of their pursuers echoing in their ears. The mountains loomed like jagged sentinels, their dark silhouettes cutting through the violet sky. Ethan's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps, each footfall driving him deeper into the rocky landscape, his heart pounding with adrenaline. Behind him, the rest of the team moved just as quickly, Marcus, who had taken point, never looking back, and Lena, her scanner flashing erratically, tracking their every step. Ethan's mind raced. Their situation had gone from bad to worse. The creatures, the ones that had been stalking them, were relentless, their growls echoing in the distance, an ominous reminder of the danger that was only a few steps behind. "Keep moving!" Marcus barked over his shoulder, his voice sharp, but his eyes stayed locked forward, scanning the terrain for the next move. They'd been running for what felt like hours, but the pack of alien predators was still on their trail, gaining ground with every passing second. The closer they got to the mountains, the more Ethan could feel the weight of their survival pressing down on him. Every decision had to count now. Lena's voice crackled over the comms, low but urgent. Ethan, there's something odd. The creatures, they're not just animals. Ethan didn't slow down. His feet were numb from the exertion, but he kept his pace steady, the weight of his rifle a constant reminder that the situation could shift at any moment. What do you mean, not just animals? They're coordinated. Lena's voice was thick with disbelief. Like they're part of something. A hive, maybe. They're not just hunting, they're herding. Ethan cursed under his breath. That made sense. The growls hadn't been random, each one had been a signal. The creatures weren't after them in a conventional sense. They were pushing them somewhere, guiding them into a trap. We need to split them up. Ethan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Draw them into the open, give us some space. Not gonna be that easy. Marcus's voice was gruff, his tone laced with frustration. They're too fast. And they're all around us. Lena's scanner beeped again, more frantic this time. There's a network. They're communicating, wait, something's changing. Ethan had no time to ask for clarification. Up ahead, the ground suddenly dipped, forming a natural ravine that cut through the base of the mountains. It was their only chance, a place to make a stand. Move! Ethan shouted. Into the ravine! The three of them veered left, heading straight for the narrow passage between the rocks. As they neared the ravine, the growls intensified, echoing off the walls. The creatures were closing in. Stay low. And stay close, Ethan ordered, his voice tight with urgency. They ducked into the ravine, their footsteps muffled by the rocky earth beneath them. The space between the jagged stone walls was tight, but it provided some cover. For now. Marcus took the lead again, but his pace was more measured this time, less frantic. His expression was grim, his mind clearly working over their limited options. We can't outrun them. We have to make a stand here. We need to figure out where they're coming from, who's directing them. Ethan scanned the narrow canyon, his eyes darting over the walls. Right. But first we survive. We're not doing anyone any good if we're dead. Lena's voice was still calm but laced with anxiety. Ethan, we're running out of time. I'm getting a signal, something big is coming. It's not just the pack. Ethan's chest tightened. Something bigger? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Before Lena could respond, the first of the creatures appeared at the mouth of the ravine. It was a massive silhouette, easily twice the size of any of the pack members. The ground shook beneath its weight as it strode forward, its eyes glowing with a menacing red hue. Get back! Marcus shouted, raising his rifle. But before he could fire, the creature lunged, fast, impossibly fast. It was on them in the blink of an eye, a blur of razor-sharp teeth and talons. Ethan barely had time to react. He shoved Lena out of the way as the creature's jaws snapped shut where she'd been standing only a second before. The predator's spiked tail whipped around, striking the ground with a violent thud. Focus! Ethan shouted, trying to regain his balance. He pulled his rifle up, taking aim at the creature's exposed underbelly, but the alien beast was too quick. It darted back, its tail flicking in a blur of motion. Lena scrambled to her feet, her scanner humming as she adjusted the settings. Wait, I have it! I can disable it! Before she could finish, another creature appeared from the other side of the ravine, cutting off their retreat. We're boxed in! Marcus yelled, fury in his eyes. The gunfire erupted from his rifle, but the creatures were too agile, dodging his shots with unnatural precision. The first creature charged again, but this time, Ethan was ready. He dove to the side, just as its talons raked the ground where he had been standing. He fired, the blast from his rifle echoing off the walls of the ravine. The shot landed, just barely, in the creature's side. It howled in pain, staggering back, but it didn't fall. Lena, do something! Marcus roared, his voice rising with desperation. Lena wasn't responding. Her hands were shaking as she adjusted her scanner again, trying to access something that wasn't there. Come on! Ethan muttered under his breath. They didn't have time for this. He threw his weight into a desperate charge, tackling the creature with all his might. It was like hitting a wall of muscle and scale, but the momentum was enough to push it off balance. The creature let out a snarling cry, thrashing beneath him. "Move!" Ethan shouted to Marcus and Lena. "Now!" They didn't hesitate. The ravine was closing in, and their window was rapidly shrinking. The creatures were closing in, but so were the walls of the ravine. This was their moment. The ground beneath Ethan's feet vibrated as the creatures closed in, their growls reverberating off the jagged stone walls. The ravine, their last sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, and the sharp tang of blood, a scent that was all too familiar, but still never welcome. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears, every beat an insistent reminder that this might be it. His rifle was in his hands, but the creatures were fast, their armor like hides resistant to the rounds they had already fired. They needed something more. Something bigger. Something unexpected. "Marcus!" he rasped, eyes flicking to his teammate who was now backed into the corner of the ravine, his rifle raised but his eyes strained. "Any ideas?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. He was too busy firing, his shots hissing through the air but bouncing off the monstrous predators as they flanked the group. "I've got nothing, except we need to get out of here," Marcus finally grunted, reloading in one smooth motion. "But these things, they're too smart. They're working together." Lena's voice crackled through the comms, strained but determined. "Wait. I've got a theory. If we disable the..." Another creature lunged, its body massive, moving faster than anything that should have been that size. It nearly caught Marcus, but he dove out of the way just in time, firing as he moved. The shot landed, but the creature merely staggered back, its glowing red eyes narrowing, fixating on him. It roared, a terrible, guttural sound that rattled the very bones in Ethan's body. "No time for theories, Lena!" Ethan shouted. "We need a plan now!" Lena's scanner hummed as she moved quickly, crouching beside a jagged boulder. Her fingers danced over the device, the small screen flickering with data. She looked up at Ethan, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. "I think I can short-circuit their neural link," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "If I can interrupt their coordination, we'll have a shot at taking them down." Ethan narrowed his eyes, trying to process the information. "How long?" Lena didn't hesitate. "A few seconds. Maybe less if you give me cover." Marcus's voice came next, tense and heavy with urgency. "A few seconds? We don't have that long." Ethan looked between Marcus and Lena, weighing their options. The creatures were circling now, stalking them like predators with a terrifying level of intelligence. Every instinct told him to run, but the walls of the ravine were closing in. He couldn't afford to let them take the lead. "I'll cover you," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. "You make it quick, Lena. Marcus, get ready to hit them with everything you've got once they're down." Lena nodded, but Ethan could see the uncertainty in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of decision you made lightly. But there was no time for second-guessing. The first creature lunged again. Ethan moved first, diving to the side and rolling to his feet in one fluid motion. He fired, his shot connecting with the creature's shoulder, but it only slowed the beast for a moment. Marcus was already in position, taking careful aim. "On your mark," Marcus said, his voice steady even under pressure. "Give me a shot, and I'll bring it down." The second creature approached, snapping its jaws and sending a guttural growl into the ravine. It was followed by another, then a fourth. Ethan's stomach twisted. There was no way they could fight them all at once. Lena's fingers moved faster across her device, the display flickering. "Just a few more seconds." The seconds felt like hours. Ethan gritted his teeth, stepping forward as one of the creatures lunged toward him. He met it with a swift, calculated movement, sidestepping its attack and aiming for its vulnerable underbelly. He fired once, twice, and then ducked as another predator charged from the left. The third creature was faster. It rushed at Lena, its massive body moving with an inhuman speed. Ethan dove in front of her, slamming into the creature's side and knocking it off course just as Lena finished her sequence. "Now!" Lena shouted, her voice taut with concentration. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He pulled the trigger, firing a round that hit the creature's skull directly. It staggered and collapsed, a final, hollow cry echoing through the ravine. Marcus followed suit, unleashing a barrage of fire at the next creature. It reeled back, howling in pain before finally collapsing to the ground. But there were more. They kept coming, the remaining predators unfazed by the fall of their kin. Ethan's heart raced as he realized they were still outnumbered. The neural disruption Lena had triggered wasn't enough to break their coordination completely. They needed a better shot. "We need more firepower," Marcus said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Lena, what's next?" Lena looked up, eyes wide as the data streamed across her device. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but she didn't stop. "There's a central core in their command structure. If I can disable it, I'll shut down their coordination. But I need a minute." Ethan's eyes scanned the ravine, locking onto the remaining creatures. His pulse quickened as the pack began to circle, closing in. "No more minutes," Ethan growled, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Lena, now?" She didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, she activated the final command. The creatures stopped for a split second, their glowing eyes dimming. Then, in a thunderous ripple, they collapsed. The ravine fell silent, the tension of battle still lingering in the air. Ethan stood, breathing heavily, his body drenched in sweat. Marcus and Lena were close behind, their faces just as grim. They'd won, but the cost had been high. The creatures were down, but the war wasn't over. Ethan looked at his team, his gaze steady, knowing their fight wasn't finished yet. There was more to uncover. More to survive. But for now, they had won.